My name is Julie Morse, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Success here at Swan Island Networks. I'd also like to introduce my colleague who will be presenting this morning, Noah Hartnett. Noah is one of our intelligence analysts on the team here at Swan.
Hello, everyone. Happy you're all here. Looking forward to doing this webinar.
Thanks, Noah. So this is the first in a series of webinars on topics that our team has identified and researched to help organizations like yours address the threats of today's world. Today, we're going to focus on a very pertinent topic, natural disaster management and recovery during the COVID-19 outbreak. In doing so, we will also highlight the use of our TX360 software platform in monitoring these key issues. So if you have any questions during the presentation, we would love to hear from you. Please feel free to type them in the chat window, which is in the upper right on the GoToMeeting. And we'll do our best to capture those and address those in the Q&A at the end of the session. Just as a note, we are recording this session so that we can share it with you and others after the webinar. So let's take a quick look at the agenda. We'll begin today's webinar with an overview of the topic, natural disasters during this outbreak. We'll then explore the unique impacts COVID-19 has had and will continue to have on our natural disaster response and the efficacy of our normal relief strategies. We'll take a look at the glimpse of hope that's the silver lining in all this, which includes the social distancing piece of this. And finally, we'll review strategies to successfully manage and mitigate severe weather, natural disasters, and disruptions in the coming months, despite the added impacts of COVID-19. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Noah Hartnett, our intelligence analyst, who is going to walk us through some of the major challenges that COVID-19 has posed in handling natural disaster season so far.
Thanks so much, Julie. So each year, the United States braces for a season of natural disasters. This year is no different, with the season beginning in March. But this year, the natural disaster season coincides with a global pandemic. That means that years of preparedness training and solution building to mitigate this season alone won't be sufficient to tackle natural disasters this year. To avoid catastrophe, these solutions must be reevaluated and adjusted to reflect the new threats. Go to the next slide. So what are the threats? Tornadoes, wildfires, and hurricanes are some of the major seasonal threats faced by the United States, each bringing their own downstream challenges, including flooding, mudslides, and of course, widespread destruction. As we already said, the season started in March with tornadoes. Wildfire season will start either this month or next, and then we'll see the hurricane season going from June all the way to December. So let's look at an outlook of what's coming. First off, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration posts a hydrologic assessment at the start of each spring. The assessment this year points to an elevated flood risk for 128 million people across the country, with 1.2 million people at risk of major flooding. On the map to the right there, you can see the purple is where the people are facing a major risk of flooding. Colorado State University forecasts that Atlantic hurricanes are more likely than average to make landfall this season, with 4 major hurricanes expected. And finally, the relatively dry winter in the western United States is likely to contribute to heightened risk of wildfires this season. You can go on to the next slide now. Each of these predictions is significant on its own, but in the context of COVID-19, these threats are exacerbated further. Let's walk through some of the major challenges posed by COVID-19 and the ways they impact how we usually tackle disaster management. Go next slide. So first, volunteers in aid. In the aftermath of natural disasters, volunteers are often critical to the rebuilding effort. But financially, these aid groups are struggling with funding due to the COVID-19 outbreak and the subsequent economic shutdown. These organizations have also had trouble recruiting new volunteers due to the social distancing guidelines and have struggled to adjust strategies to train them for field response. Those organizations that are responding to disaster zones amid COVID-19 are implementing new methods to best adhere to health guidelines. Organizations are also encouraging volunteers who feel unwell to forego volunteering, and there have been some attempts to use volunteers remotely. Volunteer groups will almost certainly have a smaller impact this season due to these restrictions. Going to the next one. So, emergency personnel and government assistance are critical to natural disaster response and recovery. But COVID-19 may have a significant impact on their efficacy this season. Emergency professionals like firefighters, police officers, and EMS providers are the first to respond to natural disasters. And this season, they will be at a high risk of exposure to COVID-19 when working with patients in disaster zones. Measures have been put in place to mitigate the risk, but an investigation by ProPublica found that directives by the CDC for emergency professionals were not released until after the first US case and after at least one firefighter in California had been infected following the line of duty. Furthermore, these measures, mainly patient screening and the use of personal protective equipment when infection is suspected, are imperfect and at best only reduce the risk of exposure. This means that emergency professionals are getting exposed, they're having to self-isolate, and they're being taken out of the action. The downstream impacts of this will be a significantly decreased ability for emergency professionals to respond to natural disasters when they hit, which will have a significant impact on overall disaster response and recovery. On the topic of government aid, natural disaster assistance falls under the purview of government organizations like FEMA. FEMA has explicitly said that COVID-19 will not prevent them from responding to natural disaster zones. But they have also had their own significant COVID-19 response that is taking up resources. It's a reasonable question to ask if those resources will be spread any thinner than usual by the virus outbreak. This question matters as hospitals too are being stretched to the breaking point by COVID-19. Elevated levels of aid and intervention may be needed for regional healthcare infrastructures to avoid being overwhelmed when disaster hits. If we go on to the next slide, we can get a look at a recent example that highlights some of these challenges we've recently discussed. On March 3rd of this year, a tornado ripped through Nashville, Tennessee, resulting in widespread destruction. This event coincided, as we all know, with the rise of COVID-19 cases in the US. In this case, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency announced that it would reduce the in-person recovery activities in 3 counties due to COVID-19 precautions. In addition, Hands on Nashville, a local organization that responds to crises all over the city, shifted their usual in-person efforts to drive-by distribution of food and supplies. They also limited their response teams to no more than 10 individuals in a group. These measures helped minimize the COVID-19 risk for those who were helping out in the city, but it also hindered their ability to provide aid. On to the next slide. Another one of the primary challenges to be considered during natural disasters is how and where to shelter individuals directly impacted. COVID-19 has further complicated this challenge. There will be a substantial risk of COVID-19 outbreaks at crowded public evacuation centers, as social distancing under the conditions at least normally found at disaster shelters is near impossible. Many buildings usually converted to shelters are closed due to widespread business closures, and food usually supplied by restaurants to feed the victims of natural disasters are closed or working in limited capacity. Even details as small as being unable to use traditional buffet methods for feeding evacuees will threaten the ability to safely shelter and support victims of natural disasters during COVID-19. Solving these critical problems will require preparation now and constant creative problem solving later, like utilizing empty hotels to ensure having access to shelters during natural disasters continues this season. I'm going to the next slide. So this slide is an example of some storms that hit the southern US on April 12th and 13th of this year. These severe storms battered the southern states, destroying homes and causing widespread damage and destruction. In these 2 tweets, you can see some examples of the alerting that went out to victims regarding social distancing and shelters. It's interesting to see the visual on the right. All right, finally, communication and messaging. So, as we all know, politicians and community leaders have for weeks been encouraging people to social distance and stay indoors. This posed challenges when natural disasters this season erupted. People were left confused about whether to prioritize social distancing or their immediate safety by evacuating and heading to shelters. With new information and guidance from the government about the risks of COVID-19 coming out constantly, evacuation orders and advice inevitably coming out in a crisis situation, it is an imperative that preparations be taken to ensure clear and effective communication when disaster strikes. Finally, the silver lining. We've gone through many of the challenges that we're going to face this natural disaster season under COVID-19, but there are also some advantages to social distancing methods that we can explore. The next slide. So some advantages to lockdowns during natural disasters. First off, with most states and cities going into lockdown, remain largely in their homes, leaving only for the essentials. This definitely has its advantages during disasters where more people are contained to shelters or safe areas rather than driving around or congregating in outdoor places. This is also true for businesses who normally will take extra precautions to safeguard their employees at the place of business. And while they still have to safeguard their property and be worrying about their employees, it's a different type of problem. Finally, many people already purchase food and supply stockpiles to cope with the outbreak. These preparations coincidentally leave them well equipped to deal with the large-scale power outages, water outages, and store closures that a destructive natural disaster may cause as well. And a quick example of the silver lining again. The mall at Turtle Creek in Jonesboro, Arkansas was hit by a severe tornado on March 28th at 5 p.m. That was a Saturday. Many of the stores within the mall were completely destroyed. At that time of day, pre-economic shutdown, the mall would have been completely filled with people. But due to lockdown measures, everything was closed. It's safe to assume that lives were spared that day due to the mall shutdown.
Thanks so much, Noah. So let's transition to talk about the next steps here. So we're here to talk about natural disasters during COVID-19, and that season is already upon us, as we know, with the tornadoes season. And we recognize that many of the natural disaster management tools we have and strategies that we've used will be complicated and or severely limited this year. So with that in mind, is what are things we can do to maximize the efficiency of the limited funding, limited aid support, and healthcare infrastructure? That's going to be critical. So an easy first step to do this is to make sure that the coordination and information sharing piece are being achieved and at the highest level possible. With limited resources, communications and coordination will be the best way to ensure that the highest priority problems are solved first and that people are safe and that the disaster impact is minimized. So as we discussed earlier, guidelines, solutions, and best practices are disparate, constantly changing right now. So monitoring and communicating new information will be the absolute best way to quickly share the knowledge that's going to be needed to adjust to these new challenges and ultimately recover from these impending disasters. So to achieve these goals, intelligence management and dissemination tools will be needed. So we're going to look closely at some tools and resources that can help manage the information flow and also surge with our current reality and changing scenarios. These include cloud technology, harnessing information sources that are available 24/7 and via the internet. All right, so shifting gears a little bit to talk about situational awareness and an example of a tool that can help prepare for and manage this challenge. So on any given day, this is the landscape of threats that a global corporation may be facing. Maybe not a global corporation, maybe even a national corporation. Usually one or two at a time, sometimes a few at small scale popping up. But right now, with the global pandemic happening, having overtaken for the last 6 weeks or so, we now face a stack of these at once. And as we enter severe weather and natural disaster season, this is piling up. Not to mention that we're also seeing various flare-ups of other threat activity, including unrest and protests, certain crime, some terrorism and cyber crime taking advantage of the situation. So it's definitely complex. So just to kind of do some defining and set the stage a bit when we talk about these terms, we talk about situational awareness as a means to anticipate, mobilize, and respond. And of course, in order to safeguard lives, property, and continuity. In fact, George Washington recognized this in the early days when he actually dedicated part of his budget to intel gathering. He said, "Do not spare any reasonable expense to come at early and true information," recognizing the value in that. So in a crisis, we definitely want to minimize the time between the first detection and our reaction to it. So being ready with that information will allow us to act fast when it counts. It may be important then to also integrate with other response methods, which those are going to be unique for every organization, but for example, incident management, unified command systems, mass notification tools. And of course, very important to communicate clearly across the organization as well as with customers, partners, supply chain, and public sector. You'll want to share targeted versions of information to those different groups depending on the sensitivity level, for example, and their relationship. So let's take a look at the threat cycle. This is one way that we look at the threat cycle in these 4 pieces. Of course, we have our blue sky days. These are long behind us when it comes to COVID-19, but those are the days when we can plan, think, create, practice. Gray sky days are, step 2, where we have an identified threat, and that means we need to turn up the monitoring, tune into specific sources, do some contingency planning, and actually this is where we are at with natural disaster season, with wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes coming shortly. They're known, we've seen them before, and we have roles assigned to address them. Now, black sky days, this is where we're at with COVID-19 and where we have been for a few weeks, right in the middle of it, and quickly reacting, responding, adapting, and also uncovering the unanticipated effects, the cascading failures, and those things. The good news is on that is that we're seeing signs of the new dawn. We're going to recover from this. We're seeing some things reopen and reversals are starting. So that's really good news. So a quick intro to our platform. This is the TX360 platform. We talk about turning intelligence into action. TX360 is a global tool for situational awareness and threat monitoring, and it's composed of these 4 pillars. Channels are really the intel sources. Asset monitoring, those are your physical or geospatial locations customized to the organization. Smart alerts help you set up unique alerting profiles that are also customized to the organization. And then dashboards are a way to visualize the information and share it with a larger group. So the intel source of this actually in our system is composed of over 2,000 channels. These are sources that range from analyst curated premium global intel feed to machine automated sources, news, social media, RSS feeds, and a variety of other sources. These can be fully, customized, filtered, and aggregated, displayed, alerted on for any given customer. But this is really the meat of it. This is the source of information. So when you talk about needing to see global trends as well as hyperlocal information, this is where it starts. And then the assets are geophysical locations that can be imported in, and they are going to be the basis for assigning that proximity alerting. So when we talk about monitoring hyperlocal threats, whether it's tornadoes, wildfires, hurricanes, we can actually do it very precisely according to your locations. And these sources also help us set up custom dashboards. So just a quick example on alerts with that asset proximity. This is a typical TX360 alert that would come in a tornado watch has been issued. We've got the source located there. We have an asset that is in proximity, very close proximity to this incident, a quick snapshot on the map, and then a property set which outlines the categories and various pieces relevant to that incident. Other proximity alerting examples include this automated earthquake alert, which shows the proximity to the nearest asset. Other examples from our COVID-19 monitoring include government-issued announcements. In Japan, there were several recent updates there. These are just examples. So we move on to smart alerts. This is where the intelligence becomes actionable. So smart alerts deliver information according to your unique profiles and settings, monitoring assets, locations, and brands even, and they're sent in real time to text message or email. So these are totally customizable to teams, to locations, and they're global or local. They can be filtered by threat type, severity, industry, and they can target specific sets of recipients using keywords and various other forms. So look at the anatomy of an alert. We previewed one just a few slides ago. These are automatically sent to email addresses and text according to the client settings. So you'll get a real-time snapshot of the event title, an incident description, a graphic where available. In this case, there's the NWS standard thunderstorm watch graphic, and then actually a link to the original so that you can drill in for more information. This is an example of our automated tornado watches and warnings. This was a very surprising and interesting alert last week of a tornado in the Bronx, as you can see here. These can be delivered very precisely based on proximity to assets or to a general location. So this is automated, machine automated, and full of rich information directly to the inbox. Similarly, for thunderstorms, we're using official NWS feeds. These are running through our machine automation process, and the delivery is automated based on client settings. In addition, our analyst team is also curating certain alerts and adding additional information where useful through our global intelligence feed. So these are two examples of those approaches, and you can see the asset proximity included in one, and then kind of the breadth of the reach of the incident on the other. Of course, we've been monitoring COVID-19 outbreak from day one and before the early indications as it spread around the world. And we've been alerting out regularly regarding associated closures, the travel shutdowns, official city and state rulings, then followed by the mask guidelines, requirements, restrictions on gathering, etc. We use a variety of open sources for this. Everything from CDC updates to State Department to OSAC and numerous international sources as well. The good news is, as this reopens, it's going to begin to track the reopening, recovery timelines, and it's going to be important to track all the status of these various things as we go the other direction, especially as this will be happening in the midst of this natural disaster season. Wanted to just provide a quick snapshot inside our app of how these alerts are aggregated. So there's a web view for these as well. You can receive them in email, but also view them here. So you can see that there's a combination of topics and profiles here. These can be fully customized to your needs. So you may have a blend of severe weather as well as COVID disruptions feeding in to provide that complete intel picture that you need. These can be shared. Of course, the emails can be forwarded, but they can also be shared from within the app to make sure that specific team members receive specific alerts as needed. Just hit a button and add an email address. So dashboards are really that visual piece. They're a common way of displaying a lot of information in a single screen, a single pane of glass, so to speak. Dashboards offer 24/7 monitoring, and they can provide that unique global or local view of your threat profiles or crisis scenarios. Of course, in this example, this was a specific wildfire in Southern California that had a lot of impact, and you can see that we're pulling in a variety of sources that are highly targeted and focused on this crisis. So we may, in this case, be pulling in feeds from the fire cams, which are especially interesting for this crisis, as well as traffic cams, which may be helpful as people are navigating moving people and logistics on highways and freeways around that. We're going to look at a couple more examples here. So this is an example of a tornado watch dashboard for the US. This one is monitoring, of course, official NWS watches and warnings, but it's also pulling in news and social media that's been especially tuned to the topic and related interests. So in this, you can imagine putting your own assets on this map and being able to see that in context of the alerts, and also, specifically filtering the information to what you need, what your team and clients and colleagues need. Similarly, U.S. Severe Weather Dashboard monitors a variety of channels tuned into thunderstorms, tornadoes, flooding, but also catches severe temperature warnings, winds, etc. And there are pre-configured gadgets here for forecast and outlook information. These are automated, bringing in from NOAA and NWS, all of that critical and dynamic information that's useful for a clear picture going forward. So wildfire season brings a new set of challenges. So we look to a new set of information sources here. For a forward-looking picture, we will use a common operating picture like this one, which will include general incoming wildfire information and alert feeds across the country. Once a major fire or regional fire season starts up, we'll then spin up specific dashboards that'll be focused just like that Southern California one I showed a couple slides ago. It'll be focused on the region of interest and associated alerts specific to that. So it'll be tracking announcements, hashtags, evacuation notices from the county and local Facebook pages, power issues, and then actually pulling in the GIS overlay for that fire so that you can track the fire spread, proximity to your assets, and key locations. There's a deep dive capability there that when this type of crisis occurs that we use with our software. I mentioned at the beginning access to our demo site, and I'll show our COVID-19 free dashboard site, and I'll share that at the end of the webinar as well. We have a number of COVID-19 dashboards available on that site. The login information will be shared. And these are aggregating automated numbers from various official sites and feeds, bringing it together under a single pane of glass. So we're now looking at recovery conditions coming and tracking economic implications, as well as citywide views for key cities across the US. So I'd encourage you to check them out and also reach out with any questions on those as well. So to wrap up with just a quick summary of TX360, this is a powerful tool that can help bring in both that global view and the hyperlocal intelligence that's needed to monitor complex situations, such as the one that we're in today, and it looks like we'll be facing for the near future. TX360 is very affordable, easy to start up, easy to use, and can bring great efficiencies to the practice of threat monitoring. Many people around the country, employees, are Googling on a day-to-day basis for the latest updates on specific things. TX360 can offer an automated alternative that's organized, accessible resource, enabling quicker action, collaboration, and increasing the overall intelligence level across an organization. I'd be very happy to talk to you about this after the call. Feel free to reach out. We can set up a custom demo at your convenience. So the good news for COVID-19, there's signs of recovery coming. We have focused on flattening the curve to date, and now we're headed toward that accelerate the recovery goal. Looking ahead at the upcoming disaster season, overall, the time to prep and plan is right now. So the fact that you're here today means you've got that in mind, you're well on your way, and that's a great sign. Situational awareness is a critical 24/7 function. Proactive threat monitoring will actually increase that mitigation and improve the response time. And then information sharing is key, leveraging the knowledge that's out there on a global and a hyperlocal basis to act quickly, be more prepared, and tackle the challenges that are ahead proactively. So thank you so much for joining us. I think we'll go into a Q&A session now for a few minutes. Again, point to the free dashboard monitoring site here, which provides a lot of useful information about COVID and also an overview of how our tool operates with the dashboards. So Noah, do you have any questions pop up for the Q&A today?
Yes, I do have a few. First off, thanks so much, Julie. That was great. Got a few questions here. The first one is, how is information that TX360 provides different from what I can find on the news?
It's a good question. So TX360 references thousands of open sources, including breaking news, social media, RSS feeds, and a variety. And we have a set of analysts that are hard at work in curating this and vetting the sources and also curating a premium global feed so that what you get can be highly customized, targeted, delivered exactly what you need to stay on top of things.
Fantastic. The next question is, with the trend of some states opening their economies and easing COVID-19 related restrictions, will this all remain relevant? Will TX360 still remain utilizable?
That's a great question. These are changing times and everybody's adapting. I actually wonder if you might tackle that, Noah, from the analyst and information perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say one of the, at least in the last month and a half, as this pandemic has slowly spread throughout the world, the thing that struck me most was the fractured response across different countries and even within the US, many different states behaving in very different ways in response to this crisis. And I think we're going to see the exact same thing as we slowly move into the recovery stage of the COVID-19 outbreak. And I think we're going to see very disparate responses across the different regions of the US. And I think that's going to make it even more important to have some kind of situational awareness solution. So if you do have, even if you have operations just in 2 states, you are able to keep track of what the different regulations are, what the different professionals, government officials, experts across the country are saying in response to this crisis. I don't think it's going to get simpler. It's probably going to get more complicated as we get into recovery, and keeping everything straight and making sure you have the correct and most up-to-date information will be critical.
Mm-hmm.
The next question on the list we have here is there a way for me to easily share the severe weather alerts with my team if they are not signed up for the product?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are open to sharing. Obviously, you can forward emails, but we have a couple ways to share from within the app as well. Sharing from the queue, which is your smart alert profile queue. You can also share from the dashboards. So you'll see in the dashboards any given event that shows up. You can click on it, open it up, and there'll be a share button there that will let you forward that on to people's email or other users if you're on a shared platform. So definitely, we're all for sharing.
Fantastic. Okay, next question. What has happened in hours of the day? Is this content available 24/7?
Yeah, so weather doesn't stop, disasters don't stop. We are monitoring that 24/7. We have thousands of feeds that are running around the clock, and can be set up to automate the delivery. So you can get woken up in the night to a tornado warning that is within 10 miles of your facility, for example. Um, there's there are numerous examples of that in our with our clients that are receiving very precise proximity-based alerting around the clock.
Absolutely fantastic. And the last question we have here, the existing dashboards seem like a great resource. Do you update them and create new ones if severe weather events happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely yes. You might be even better set to answer this, Noah, from the analyst and support standpoint. You want to tackle that?
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, I know different examples of dashboards that we have created. We are dashboards for our clients and for clients collectively when we identify topics like COVID-19 that we will provide further coverage of. We're doing a basis. We're slowly moving to wildfire season here, and then hurricane is going to start too. And that is a application of the dashboard that is particularly valuable according to our clients. And whenever there's anything pertinent that we think is supported a good application to provide situational awareness to our clients, we create dashboards because we find that to be a really valuable way of applying the technology.
Excellent. And I would just add to that that the login information that we're sharing here is a dynamic monitoring site. So as new crises arise, we'll be sharing information through that site. You can check back regularly. Hurricane season. These are general monitoring overviews. For a precise and customized version of this, that's where you want to go into looking at TX360 as a platform to use within the organization. But in the meantime, I encourage you to utilize that tool. Thanks to everybody for being here today, and I just welcome any follow-up. My contact information here is below. You're welcome to drop me an email anytime, and thanks for joining us. Best of luck in this upcoming season, and take care. Thank you.